The clock tower that has no hands. In the shadowed hills of northern Italy, nestled in a quiet valley forgotten by most maps, there lies a village called Montergrove, a place not known for fame nor fortune, but for something far stranger, a clock tower that has no hands. Rising above the cobbled streets and stone-roofed houses, the tower stands defiantly medieval, its bricks weathered, its face blank, yet it ticks. Every hour, without fail, the sound echoes through the village, a steady tick, then a low, hollow chime. There are no gears exposed, no pendulum seen swinging, and yet locals swear by its rhythm. The old people say, "It keeps time, but not the kind you know," and when asked what it truly measures, they grow quiet or change the subject. The tower, as records show, was constructed in 1347, the same year the Black Death began creeping through Europe. At the time, Montergrove was no more than a farming outpost surrounded by deep forests and misty hills. It had no nobility, no riches, only a strange devotion to the old calendar cycles that predated Christianity. Some say the villagers still practice the rites of the calendimaggio, ancient fertility rituals drawn from even older Etruscan myths. The clock tower, unlike others of its era, was not built to mark time for the market or for church bells. It had no minute hand, no hour hand, no dial at all, just a smooth circular stone face etched with 12 cryptic symbols, none of which match Roman numerals or Arabic. Researchers who have studied it compare the symbols to early Celtic ogham, others to Sumerian cuneiform, but they match nothing exactly. When the plague reached Montergrove in the winter of 1348, the village was mysteriously spared, not a single recorded death. Priests from nearby towns came to investigate, thinking it a miracle or a case of isolation. What they found disturbed them more. At midnight during the new moon, the villagers gathered silently around the tower. No words were spoken. Only the soft ticking could be heard, like a heartbeat in the stone. They left, frightened. One report from a friar, preserved in the Vatican archives, describes the villagers as guardians of a rhythm older than the stars, and warns that the clock was not a measure of passing hours, but of return. For centuries, the clock has continued. It ticks through war, through empire, through silence. Napoleon's men attempted to dismantle the tower in 1805. Local legend says the engineer who entered it returned screaming, hair white, unable to speak again. Others say he vanished entirely. During World War II, the Nazis occupied Montergrove. One night, a bombing raid was redirected due to an unexplained magnetic anomaly centered exactly at the tower's location. The Luftwaffe never touched it. American troops entered in 1944 and found the clock still ticking. Soldiers described feeling off balance when standing too close, as if time around the tower felt different, like minutes elongated, thoughts slowed. The reports were buried. In 1987, a team of horologists and physicists from the University of Bologna were granted rare permission to study the clock. They brought instruments, infrared scanners, magnetic detectors. All the equipment failed within 6 feet of the structure. Recordings were distorted, batteries drained. A camera placed directly in front of the stone face captured only static, but the static had rhythm. Visible oscillations that matched no known wave pattern, but repeated every 73 seconds. Some believe the clock was created by a cult of astronomer monks who believed time was not linear, but coiled, looping back upon itself every 777 years. According to a fragmentary manuscript found in a local chapel crypt, the tower is the anchor of recurrence, set to chime in full only when the coil aligns again with its point of origin. The next alignment, according to the same document, is due in 2124. And yet, every generation, someone claims to have seen the hands, just for a moment, shimmering faintly like shadows caught between dimensions. A woman in 1921 said she saw the hands move backward. In 1963, a child said the clock had no hands because they're still coming. And in 2012, a traveler claimed the tower pulsed when she stood near it and whispered in a language she couldn't identify but somehow understood. Skeptics, of course, say it's just a psychological effect, a trick of the mind, confirmation bias, village folklore. And yet, no one has ever been able to find the mechanism inside the tower. Every time it's opened, it is empty. Just stone, dust, and silence. No gears, no escapement, no machinery. Still, the ticking continues. The villagers today still pass down the same saying, "Time lives in the stones." They teach their children not to touch the tower, not to mark its rhythm on paper, and above all, never to ask what it's counting down to. Because maybe it's not counting time forward. Maybe it's measuring the echo of something that's already happened, once, long ago, and is slowly coming back around. A clock that has no hands, a tower that marks an unknown rhythm, and a village that sleeps beneath the ticking of something no one understands. In Montergrove, time is not told. It is felt. The cathedral bell that rings at random. In the heart of Prague, within an old cathedral whose name has been worn away by time, there hangs a bell, blackened by soot, older than empires, forged in the 14th century by a monk whose name no record remembers. It doesn't hang from modern machinery. There are no ropes, no gears, no pulleys that stretch down to human hands. And yet, it rings, not often, not predictably, but always. On the day someone dies, no one knows who it tolls for. Sometimes it's a public figure, a politician, a poet. Sometimes it's someone obscure, forgotten, alone. But always, a death. And always, silence before and silence after. There is no pattern. The bell rings at different hours, no rhythm, no calendar. Sometimes it stays silent for months. Other times it tolls twice in a week, and when it rings, it is unmistakable. The sound is not like other bells. It doesn't echo, it pierces. It seems to vibrate through stone and flesh. Witnesses say it doesn't just strike the ear, it sinks into the bones. A cold resonance, a final note, and no one sees it move. No swing, no sway, just the sound, as if the air itself is tolling. Priests have tried to explain it. Engineers, skeptics. In 1923, the city even installed scaffolding around the tower, set up cameras, pressure sensors, vibration detectors. For 2 years, nothing happened. And then, one rainy night in May, the bell rang. The cameras caught nothing. The sensors recorded no motion. The bell remained perfectly still. And yet the sound was heard across the city. That night, a local boy was found drowned in the river. No one had known he was missing. No one had called out. But the bell had. And that's when the stories began to change. It wasn't just that the bell rang when someone died. It was that it knew. It knew before the body was found, before the news broke, before the final breath. Some say the bell marks not death itself, but the moment the soul leaves. Others say it rings for certain kinds of deaths only, unjust ones, lonely ones, violent ones, the kinds that demand to be noticed, as if the bell is not just an instrument, but a witness, and sometimes a warning. In 1942, it rang twice in a single night. The next morning, a resistance leader was executed by Nazi soldiers. The day after, the cathedral was bombed. The bell was untouched. It rang again 3 weeks later. And again, the same silence afterward. Every attempt to study it fails. Technicians climb the tower and find no mechanism. The clapper is rusted into place. The beam above it is cracked. The metal is ancient, warped, brittle, weather-eaten. It shouldn't be able to ring, but it does, and always, only once. A single note, long and low. As if announcing something only the dead understand. Tourists don't hear it. Only locals, always the locals. as if the sound exists only for those meant to hear it, a kind of selective resonance, a memory inside stone. The church has tried to deny it. They blame pranksters, faulty acoustics, legends. But when the bell rang in 2005, on the morning a beloved old gravedigger passed in his sleep, before anyone found the body, the priest who'd mocked the story left his post by sundown. He never returned. He said nothing. But he left behind a journal, just one line, scrawled across the final page. The bell rang before I knew, but somehow I already felt it coming. So, what is it? A glitch in physics? A curse? A relic of some divine machinery whose purpose we've long forgotten? Or maybe something simpler. Maybe the bell is what happens when grief imprints itself onto metal. Maybe it was built by hands that understood sorrow not as an accident, but as an inevitability. Maybe the monk who forged it wasn't trying to warn us. Maybe he was trying to comfort someone, or someone else. And maybe, just maybe, the bell doesn't toll for the dead. Maybe it tolls for us, to remind us that time is limited, that silence can break, that every breath is an interval, and that somewhere, high above the fog, hidden in the stones of a city that has seen too much, there is a sound that cannot be explained, only felt. The clock that predicted. Eclipses before science did. In a quiet corner of an old monastery, tucked beneath layers of dust, stone, and secrecy, sat a machine. It didn't look like much, just a collection of gears, discs, and ancient inscriptions, corroded with age, nearly forgotten by time. But this machine held a secret. It could predict lunar eclipses, not by magic, not by guessing, but by a mechanical logic so precise, so unthinkably advanced, that it defied everything historians believed about ancient technology. This was a Byzantine clock, and it was centuries ahead of its time, long before Galileo turned his telescope to the heavens, before Newton named gravity, before Copernicus rewrote the sky. This device had already mapped the moon's shadows. It had calculated the rhythms of celestial events that modern science would not fully unravel for another 1,000 years. The machine didn't just guess when an eclipse would occur, it knew. It measured the Saros cycle, a complex 18-year pattern of lunar and solar eclipses, using gears carved with ratios so precise they mirrored the orbital relationships of the Sun, Earth, and Moon. Somehow, someone had translated the movements of the heavens into the turning of bronze wheels, and no one could explain how. This wasn't just a tool, it was a message, from a civilization we've underestimated, from minds we once dismissed as primitive. The device, now known as the Byzantine eclipse mechanism, was discovered by accident during a renovation in the 1800s. Monks had unknowingly built over it, covered it in plaster and stone, maybe to protect it, maybe to forget it. When archaeologists finally examined the object, they were stunned. Gears within gears. Inscribed markings detailing lunar phases, eclipse dates, planetary positions. An analog computer before computers existed. The question isn't just how it worked, it's why it existed. Who made this? Why was it hidden? And why did its knowledge vanish? Some believe it was created by scholars within the Byzantine Empire, an empire known more for theology than science. But within its monasteries were thinkers, record-keepers, astronomers who preserved ancient Greek knowledge when the West was still in darkness. Others whisper it came from something even older, that the knowledge wasn't just preserved, but rediscovered, because this wasn't the only machine of its kind. There's another, more famous, pulled from the wreckage of a Greek shipwreck in 1901, the Antikythera mechanism. It too could predict eclipses. It too contained impossibly complex gear systems, and it too was lost for centuries, like a chapter torn out of human history. Together, these machines suggest something few want to believe, that ancient civilizations may have reached technological heights we only now begin to understand, and then forgotten them, buried them beneath war, fire, religion, and time. It's a cycle we don't like to admit. Progress, collapse, knowledge, silence. We imagine human history as a steady climb. But what if it's not? What if it's a spiral? What if the minds behind these mechanisms saw the universe with a clarity we've only just begun to reclaim? Let's return to that monastery. Imagine the monk who stumbled upon the device. Did he understand what it was? Did he turn its gears and feel the chill of something forbidden? Did he hear, in its ticking, the echo of a world far older than his scriptures? We'll never know. The machine remains partially decoded. Some of its markings still resist translation. But one thing is clear. This clock, this relic, predicted eclipses before the birth of modern astronomy, before telescopes, before physics. It turned shadows into schedules, mystery into math. And then it disappeared, waiting for us to catch up. So the next time you see a lunar eclipse, casting its slow shadow over the Earth, remember, someone once watched it too, not with fear, but with understanding. Because hidden beneath the robes of monks and the ruins of time, there were minds who mastered the cosmos and left behind clocks that remembered long after we forgot. The clock with gears made of bone. They found it deep underground, behind rusted steel doors, in an abandoned German stronghold, a room sealed for centuries, untouched by war, weather, or time. Inside, nothing but dust, silence, and a single object sitting on a cracked stone pedestal. A clock, but not like any clock you've seen. Its casing was dark oak, blackened with age, etched with runes no one could fully translate. The hands moved in perfect silence, gliding across a face marked with a strange lunar calendar, neither Julian nor Gregorian. But what made this clock unforgettable was its core, the gears. They weren't made of metal. They were carved, meticulously, impossibly, from bone, human bone, some large, some small, a femur-shaped gear here, a knucklebone spindle there. Even the tiniest cogs, perfectly interlocked, were made from slivers of what scientists later confirmed to be cranial bone, still moving, still ticking. 600 years later. The room had no power, no wind, no machinery to explain the motion. Yet the bone gears turned with mechanical precision, never stopping, never slowing, as if time itself was trapped in the marrow. The researchers were skeptical at first. They assumed it was a hoax. But radiocarbon dating told another story. The bones were real. The age matched. The wear on the teeth of the gears suggested centuries of use. But there was more. The clock didn't mark seconds, or minutes, or hours. It tracked something else. The outer ring was etched with a cycle no one recognized, half astronomical, half anatomical. Symbols of eclipses paired with human organ diagrams, moons next to rib cages, solar flares beside spinal cords. What was this thing measuring? Time? Life? Decay? One theory emerged. They called it the pulse engine, a machine built to track the degradation of something invisible, something tied to both the cosmos and the body. Some speculated it was built not to tell time, but to hold it, to contain it, to stop something from escaping. And when the team tried to remove one of the bone gears to study it, everything stopped, not just the clock. The air itself felt heavier. 3 of the researchers reported intense nausea. 1 collapsed. The gear refused to be detached. Not by force, not by heat, not even by acid. It was as if it wasn't just held in place, it was meant to stay, as though removing a single piece would shatter something beyond mechanical balance. Then came the inscription. Hidden beneath the base, burned into the wood with something older than fire. Translated roughly, it read, "As long as it turns, the pact holds. Should it stop, so does the forgetting." The forgetting? What did we forget? What was sealed in this place, this bunker, this tomb of time? Some say the clock was built by an occult order that believed time wasn't a river, but a parasite, something that feeds, something that requires a host. And if left unchecked, it would consume every living mind by replacing memory with routine. A full loop, a reset, civilization devouring itself every few centuries. Unless Something kept it aligned, unless something ancient and alive kept it fed. And perhaps that something was the clock, a time trap, a pacifier, built from the bones of those who understood what time really is and were willing to give their bodies to hold it still. And now it sits in a vault, behind 5 layers of lead, blessed by 4 religions, monitored by instruments that don't even know what they're watching, because the gears still turn, because something must be turning with them, and because no one wants to know what happens if it stops. So the next time you feel a chill, when the room goes quiet, or notice the ticking of a clock you never heard before, ask yourself, is it time you're hearing, or is it something older, something with gears made of bone, still moving, still watching, still remembering? The sundial that works indoors. There's a castle in Spain where time does something strange. Inside a chamber, buried beneath stone walls and a ceiling that has blocked sunlight for centuries, stands a carved slab. Nothing ornate, nothing mechanical, just stone. And yet, it tells time, perfectly, to the hour, sometimes to the minute. It's called a sundial, but it should not work, because it hasn't seen sunlight in over 400 years. The ceiling above it was sealed sometime in the 1600s. No openings, no glass, no shafts of light. And yet, visitors have observed the stone shifting in its tones, casting subtle shadows, warming at precise angles, somehow indicating the hour of day. Locals don't question it. They call it a relic, a curiosity. But historians and physicists have tried, and failed, to fully explain how a sundial functions in the dark. The mystery is housed in the Castillo de Belmonte, a fortress near Cuenca, built in the 15th century. Tucked within its heavy stonework is a chamber once used for alchemical studies and astronomical observations. It was in this very room that someone, centuries ago, carved a circular marker into the floor, a dial with hour lines, like any ordinary sundial. But here's the impossible part. This dial was never under open sky. Historical records confirm the room was roofed from its very construction. No evidence of retractable structures. No known mechanism for admitting sunlight. Just thick beams, plaster, and stone above. So how did it work? More importantly, how does it still? Some suggest a trick of geothermal temperature, that the stone subtly reacts to the rising and falling heat of the sun outside, transmitting invisible changes through the walls, which the rock absorbs and displays. But this theory stumbles under scrutiny. Temperature variations in sealed stone rooms are too inconsistent, too delayed. Others propose that the room once had a skylight, later sealed. But ground-penetrating scans and preservation reports show no architectural signs of this, no hidden windows, no sun shafts. And even if there were, how would the sundial still function today, in total darkness? Some scholars began investigating the type of stone used. It's a rare kind, microcrystalline limestone with a unique crystalline grain structure, a stone that appears almost ordinary, until light hits it from a very specific angle. What they found shocked them. Even without visible beams of light, ambient electromagnetic waves from the sun, residual heat, and possibly even atmospheric vibrations appeared to trigger faint responses in the stone. Not enough to light a room, not enough to be visible to the eye immediately, but enough, when studied under time-lapse photography, to show a change, a pattern, a consistent rhythm. It was as if the stone remembered the sun, as if it was attuned not to sunlight, but to time itself. Historians dove into records of the chamber's use. It had once belonged to a noble family with deep ties to Moorish scholars. The Moors were known for their advanced understanding of geometry, optics, and astronomy. Some believe they may have embedded lost knowledge, encoding a sundial not just in light, but in resonance. That's when the idea surfaced. Maybe it wasn't a sundial at all. Maybe it was a time stone, a geologically tuned artifact calibrated to respond to invisible cycles of the sun, earth, and perhaps even subtle magnetic oscillations we barely understand. Could such a thing exist? In theory, yes. Some minerals are piezoelectric, meaning they respond to pressure, frequency, and even minuscule environmental changes. Under the right conditions, they can vibrate or shift, subtly changing their appearance. It's possible the stone was positioned with such precision that it responds to Earth's rotation itself, its axis and tilt guiding subtle, almost imperceptible changes in the stone's alignment and light absorption. But that would require knowledge far ahead of its time. It would mean someone in medieval Spain knew how to align a chamber, carve stone with millimeter precision, and embed it within an entirely sealed environment, and still make it keep time. There's no written explanation, no diagrams, no surviving records of who carved the dial or how it was used, just the stone, just the rhythm. In 1974, a group of engineers tried to disprove the phenomenon. They brought in modern instruments, light meters, thermographic cameras, spectral analysis. They watched the stone for days. At first, nothing. Then, just before noon, a pale halo emerged across the dial. It moved, precisely along the path one would expect the sun to cast, had the ceiling not been there. It matched the real-world hour, not once, but again the next day, and the next. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't metaphor. It was time, embedded in matter. They called it the impossible sundial. But maybe that name is wrong. Maybe it's not a sundial at all. Maybe it's something older, something we no longer understand, a relic of lost science, a whisper from a civilization that once knew how to weave time and stone together. Or perhaps it's a coincidence. Perhaps the stone merely reacts to vibrations in the building, or to seismic activity too small to register, echoing the patterns of day and night. But even that doesn't explain the precision. Even that doesn't explain how the stone always knows when it's noon, or how it shifts just slightly at dawn, or how it cools without fail, in alignment with dusk. You can visit the castle, you can stand in the chamber. The stone is still there, quiet, unassuming, and waiting. And if you sit with it long enough, you'll begin to feel it too. Not just a dial, not just a relic, but a clock, in the shape of silence, ticking, without sound, without light, keeping perfect time in the dark. The tower that tells different time for everyone. In the forested heartlands of Belgium, just outside the modern village of Verlinden, there stands a stone relic so overlooked, so forgotten by history, that even local records hesitate to mention it by name. But the villagers still whisper about it, not out of pride, but out of confusion, maybe even fear. They call it simply De Toren zonder Tijd. The Tower Without Time. Built sometime in the late 1300s, this medieval bell tower looks ordinary at first glance. Rough-hewn limestone bricks, moss-crept walls, an arched doorway, and a weathered spire that stretches barely 40 feet. There are no clocks on its face, no mechanisms visible. But inside, a single bronze bell still hangs, suspended by an ancient wooden beam that has resisted decay longer than science can explain. And when it rings, no two people hear the same thing. The phenomenon has baffled visitors for centuries. A nobleman in 1442 claimed the bell rang 8 times when he approached the door, but his companion, walking beside him, swore he only heard 3. A monk in 1517 claimed it struck one note every 5 minutes, while another visiting friar on the same day said it had not rung at all. It wasn't long before the rumors began that the tower was cursed, that it was built atop a fracture in time itself, that the bell tolls for the soul, not the hour. Early attempts to study it failed. In 1641, a Flemish astronomer named Willem de Bruyne visited Verlinden with a team of apprentices and water clocks, hoping to document the anomaly. According to his journals, still preserved in the Brussels archives, they sat in silence beneath the tower for 3 days. Each apprentice recorded their perceived bell tolls on parchment. When compared, the results showed no consistency. Some heard hourly chimes, some every 47 minutes. One boy claimed he heard nothing for 2 days, then suddenly 13 tolls in rapid succession, only for the others to insist they heard nothing. More bizarre was De Bruyne's final note. The tower knows us, it hears thought. The bell reflects not what time is, but what time means to each of us. He died a year later in Bruges, reportedly obsessed with mapping time as emotion, not measurement. By the Enlightenment, scientists began ignoring the tower, dismissing the inconsistent reports as folklore. But the villagers knew better. To this day, Verlinden has no church bells. Every funeral and wedding is held without chime, as though the very idea of measured time has been exiled from the soil. Old families teach their children, you only hear what your life allows. In 1929, a German physicist named Dr. Klaus Morgenstein visited the tower with recording equipment. A World War I veteran and pioneer in the study of acoustics, Morgenstein believed he could capture the true timing of the bell once and for all. His journals state he placed 5 microphones around the tower and waited. When the bell rang, he and 3 assistants each marked the time. Once again, each of them recorded a different number of chimes. When the tapes were played back in Berlin, they were silent. No bell. Not a whisper of metal striking metal. Just ambient wind and birdsong. Yet all 4 swore they heard it clearly. It was in that same report that Morgenstein made a chilling observation. He wrote, "The tower resists consensus. It may exist not in one timeline, but as a prism, refracting time into separate threads. The bell is not broken. We are." More recent studies have tried everything from atomic clocks to synchronized light pulses to detect any measurable vibration when the bell tolls. None succeed. Every device records silence, yet dozens of visitors still report hearing it, each, curiously, according to their own emotional state. A grieving widow heard the bell at the exact moment she thought of her husband. A child heard it just before seeing his lost dog return from the woods. One man said it only rang when he lied. If true, the tower does not measure time at all. It measures perception. It tolls not the passing of seconds, but the weight of them. Grief, guilt, memory, joy, regret. Some believe the original builders, whose identities are lost, were attempting to capture the spirit of time itself, not the sterile hours of commerce, but the fluid, personal tides of human life. One obscure legend suggests the bell was forged from the metal of a fallen star, smuggled through Genoa in secret, blessed by 3 orders of monks, and hung only after the tower was built during a full lunar eclipse. There is no proof of this, but the story lingers. There are modern skeptics, of course. Rationalists claim it's all suggestion. That expectation shapes perception, and the bell tolls are imagined. Phantoms of sound shaped by the mind's need for pattern. But if that's true, why does every visitor report hearing it differently, at different times, in different ways? Even when unprompted, why can no 2 accounts be aligned? The answer remains buried in stone. The tower is closed to the public now, a rusted gate and a plaque warn of instability, but locals know the truth. The gate was not to protect people from the stone, but from the sound. Tourists still arrive, some curious, some desperate. They sit beneath the tower, waiting. Some leave in tears, some leave smiling, some leave shaking, but none leave unchanged. And if you ever go, remember this: don't bring a watch, don't count the seconds, just listen, because if the tower tolls for you, it will not be the time you expect, it will be the time you needed to hear. The hourglass that never empties. In the crypt of an old church buried deep beneath the earth, hidden behind rusted gates and forgotten prayers, there stands an hourglass, massive, dark, forged from volcanic glass the color of obsidian. Its frame is ancient oak, blackened with age, its surface cold, even in the heat of summer, and inside, suspended between those glass chambers, is sand, or something like sand. Pale, fine, unmoving, It has not shifted in 500 years. They call it the hourglass that never empties. It sits on an altar older than the city above, lit by candlelight that flickers but never warms it. There is no inscription, no name, no origin story anyone agrees on. Only records, scattered and half erased, whispering of a gift brought by a silent monk during the plague. He left it at the altar and vanished. Since then, it has not changed. The sand remains poised in the top chamber, as if frozen mid-fall. No trickle, no motion, no sign of life. And yet, when tested, it is not solid. It is loose, responsive. It should fall. It wants to fall, but it doesn't. Not even a grain. Scientists have studied it. They've scanned the glass, measured its tilt, placed vibration sensors nearby. They've tried to recreate its properties in labs. Nothing behaves like it. No force explains it. There's no magnetic field, no internal seal, no logical reason why gravity does not apply. But it doesn't. Time, it seems, refuses to move through it. Or, perhaps, the hourglass refuses time. People who visit it report strange sensations, not visions, not voices, just a stillness that presses into the chest, like being in the eye of a storm, like something vast and slow is watching. Some feel peace, others weep without understanding why. The church won't speak of it. They allow only one visitor at a time, always under supervision, and never for more than 7 minutes, because on the 8th, something shifts. No one knows exactly what. No one who stayed that long has explained, but one priest in the 1800s disobeyed the rule. He locked himself inside with it for an hour. He emerged trembling, white-haired, silent. He never spoke again, but his journal was found later, and on the final page, in handwriting that grew frantic and faint, were the words, "It is not that time stands still, it's that time isn't allowed in." Others believe it's a prison, not for people, but for something older. That the hourglass is not a tool, but a cage. That inside its frozen sand lies something buried, not physically, but conceptually. A forgotten truth, a suspended decision, a timeline that was cut off and sealed. Some say it's the final second of a world that almost ended. Others say it's the first second of a world that never began. Either way, the hourglass holds it still, refusing to let the past become the future, refusing to let anything fall. One theory suggests it's not even from here, that it predates the church, that it was found in the ruins of another continent, a relic of a civilization that knew how to pause entropy, and left behind only one instruction: do not turn it. And that's the most chilling part, because the hourglass is upright, sand poised to fall. But what if it can be turned? What if all these years it's been waiting? What if someone, one day, flips it and time begins again, or ends, or breaks? Some legends say that the moment the sand moves, all time across the earth will reverse. Others say it will collapse, that we are living in a borrowed pause, a held breath between realities, and the hourglass is the only thing keeping the illusion intact. And that raises a question that no one can answer. If time can be paused, if it can be refused, then what is time? Is it a law, or just a rhythm? Is it something we move through, or something that moves through us? And if this hourglass can stop it, what does that say about the rest of us? Maybe our clocks lie. Maybe our aging is just a loop. Maybe there are places on this earth where the rules bend, and the hourglass beneath the church is one of them, a reminder, a warning, or a doorway we were never meant to open. So if you ever find yourself there, in that crypt, face to face with it, don't touch the glass, don't breathe too loud, and above all, don't ask how much time is left, because this hourglass has already answered, and it's been answering in silence for 500 years. The monastery gears that move on holy days. Inside the crumbled remains of an ancient abbey, past the moss-choked walls and splintered pews, there is a sound no one can explain. It doesn't happen every day, only on feast days, only when the calendar aligns with ancient rhythms no one quite remembers. And when it does, it begins. A faint whirring, a click, and then the gears begin to move. Tucked behind the altar, half buried in stone and silence, there's a mechanical system that turns by itself. No one touches it. There are no weights, no wind, no water, no visible source of power. And yet, the wheels spin, deliberately, precisely, on days once considered holy. This is the monastery gear phenomenon, a forgotten machine from a forgotten order, and it only wakes up for God. The abbey, located deep in the forests of southern Europe, was once home to a small, austere sect. Records about them are scarce. Their texts were burned, their relics stolen. All that remains is the stone skeleton of their chapel and the mechanism. When archaeologists first stumbled upon it in the early 1900s, they assumed it was a clock. But it didn't tick. It didn't mark hours. It didn't respond to touch. One researcher spent weeks attempting to wind it, only for the gears to turn days later, unprompted, on the feast of St. Michael. Coincidence? They thought so, until it happened again and again. Each time, the gears would remain motionless for days, weeks, even months, until the precise moment of a liturgical event, not just the obvious ones, not just Christmas or Easter, but obscure feast days that only the most devout monks would have known, days now forgotten by most of the world. And somehow, this machine remembers, even after the church collapsed, even after the monks vanished. It remembers. The gears themselves are old, medieval, perhaps older, iron, etched with inscriptions in Latin, Greek, and something no one has fully translated. The teeth are worn, but functional. The motion is slow, solemn, almost reverent. It doesn't spin wildly. It turns like a ritual, as if reenacting something sacred, again and again. But here's the question: how? There are no known power sources, no access to sun, water, or magnetic current. It does not respond to human presence. It doesn't spin when examined or tested, only when left alone, only on holy days. Some theorists claim it's temperature sensitive, that perhaps the stone of the abbey expands and contracts in such a specific way that it triggers the motion. Others believe the machine is astronomical, somehow attuned to celestial alignments we no longer track. A relic from a time when spirituality and astronomy weren't enemies, but mirrors. And then there are the whispers, the ones that say the monks who built it were part of a hidden order, that they didn't just record time, they synchronized with it, that they believed machinery could reflect divinity, not just mimic the heavens, but participate in them, that the machine wasn't built to tell time, it was built to honor it, to move not for man, but for something greater. And maybe that's why it only turns when the divine is near. Let me give you a story. In 1971, a local priest visited the ruins for private prayer. He wasn't there for research, just to reflect. That morning was the Feast of the Transfiguration. As he knelt at the altar, he heard it. A click, a grind, a slow, solemn turn. The gears behind the wall began to move, and the priest wept, not in fear, but in awe, because somehow, in that silence, something had answered, not with a voice, but with movement, a motion built centuries ago by hands who may have known something we forgot. Today, the abbey is mostly ignored. No signs, no crowds, just silence and stone. The machine is still there, hidden behind reinforced glass. It's been studied, scanned, mapped. No one has solved it. No one has stopped it. And still, on certain days, at certain hours, it moves, slow, steady, sacred. A whisper from the past, a ritual without a monk, a calendar etched in iron, faithful long after the faithful are gone. So the next time you hear someone say, "Machines have no soul," remember this: There is a mechanism in a ruined monastery that still remembers the holy, and it turns, not for science, not for spectacle, but for something older than both. The mechanical calendar that ended in 2099. It was never meant to be found. Buried beneath layers of collapsed earth, concrete, and rusted war machinery, an abandoned German stronghold sat forgotten. Tucked deep in a forest no longer marked on modern maps, it was sealed shut for centuries, its location unknown, its contents lost to time. Until the excavation. They were looking for bunkers, maybe war relics, maybe old munitions to be diffused and archived. What they found was something else entirely. A chamber, bone dry, untouched, sealed behind a thick vault door scorched by time, locked with a mechanical system so archaic and obscure that it took weeks to open without destroying what lay behind it. And inside, resting on a blackened stone pedestal in the center of a hexagonal room, stood a clock, roughly the size of a dinner plate. Its housing was made of aged dark oak, blackened and cracked in places, yet perfectly intact. The surface was engraved with markings, runes, some Gothic, some older, some completely unknown. The face was circular but featured no numbers, no Roman numerals, no familiar structure at all. And yet, it ticked, softly, unfailingly. The second hand swept in smooth silence, while underneath, a complex mechanism drove its motion. That's when they looked closer and realized the gears inside the timepiece weren't made of brass or steel or any conventional metal. They were carved perfectly, impossibly, from bone, human bone. Each piece shaped with microscopic precision, teeth honed to mathematical tolerances, no sign of degradation, no rot, no glue. Every gear clicked into place as if it were grown, not constructed. Femurs cut into sprockets, ribs thinned into levers, vertebrae ground into smooth, circular plates. Even the smallest cogs appeared to be fragments of phalanges, fingers, carved to a delicate point and turned into mechanisms of time. The strangest part? It still functioned. Despite being entombed for what radiocarbon dating later confirmed was over 600 years, the bone clock was still running, still marking something. But it wasn't measuring time as we know it. There were no hours, no minutes, no seconds. Instead, the dial showed a series of phases, some lunar, some biological, and some indecipherable. Diagrams etched into the wood showed eclipses paired with anatomical diagrams, solar flares beside human hearts, black crescents next to bleeding eyes. It became clear to the researchers that this was not a timekeeping device. It was something else. A measurement of entropy, perhaps, of bodily decay, of cosmic alignment, of something neither entirely physical nor spiritual, but horrifyingly precise. And when they attempted to stop it, to remove a single gear for analysis, the room changed. The air thickened. The lights dimmed, though there were no windows. 3 of the 5 on-site researchers experienced nausea, confusion, and a sudden loss of equilibrium. 1 collapsed. The gear they tried to remove refused to detach, as if magnetized or bound by something else. Not glue, not tension, something deeper. A refusal written into the object itself. They quickly reversed the attempt. The moment the mechanism was reassembled, the symptoms vanished, as if the room had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. Then they found the inscription, burned into the underside of the pedestal, nearly illegible at first, scrawled in a mix of Latin, Proto-Germanic, and symbols that defied identification. After weeks of translation, the message became clear. As long as it turns, the pact holds. Should it stop, so does the forgetting. Forgetting what? What pact? Who made it? And what was being remembered or restrained? Rumors began to swirl among researchers, archivists, military historians. Some believed the clock was the product of a secret medieval order obsessed with time and death, that its creators believed time was a disease, a parasite, something alive, That left unchecked, it would consume memory, identity, and reality itself. That the clock was not a record of time, but a prison for it. Others believed it was a relic of necromancy, a sacred engine fueled by sacrifice, that the bones weren't just materials, they were participants, volunteers, or prisoners, each piece holding a fragment of memory, a sliver of consciousness, tasked with keeping something in motion, something that must never be allowed to rest. One theory, the most disturbing, suggested that time itself wasn't linear, but looped, and the clock's purpose was to align our perception with that loop, to reset us subtly with each turn of its bone gears. And if it stopped, reality would become unstuck, memories would unspool, people would wake up into versions of themselves they'd already lived, or worse, never were. Time wouldn't stop. It would fold, collapse, shatter. And perhaps that's why the stronghold was buried, not by accident, but by design. To hide it, to protect it, to ensure it was never found, because it must never stop. Today, the clock resides in a black site, underground, isolated, observed by people who don't understand it, but are terrified of what it means. They monitor it for shifts, changes, deviations in movement, and once, only once, it did something new. A gear turned backward, only for a moment, only by a fraction. But the next morning, the lead technician on duty was found dead in his bed. Not from trauma, not from poison, but with every cell in his body aged beyond recognition. His internal clock accelerated as if caught in the backlash of something ancient, something mechanical, something with gears made of bone. And the clock keeps ticking, softly, ceaselessly, waiting. The water clock that boils cold. Hidden deep within the arched stone corridors of an ancient Moorish fortress in southern Spain is a relic that should not exist. At first glance, it appears simple. A bronze basin, glass chamber, and a narrow spout curved like a serpent's neck. But lean in close, and you'll notice something strange. The glass is fogged from the inside. Vapor curls at the edges. Steam pulses gently from the tip, despite the fact that the water inside is cold. Ice cold. No fire, no pressure chamber, no electrical system. And yet, it boils. This is the water clock that boils cold, a mysterious artifact found in a centuries-old Nasrid fortress in Granada. Unlike any traditional water clock, this one doesn't measure time by dripping. It exhales it, in steam, in rhythm. Even now, in its glass display case, sealed, untampered, untouched, it ticks, quietly, steaming, in a way no one can explain. Historians date it to the 13th or 14th century, during the zenith of Moorish science and architecture in Al-Andalus. The Nasrid dynasty, renowned for their mathematical knowledge and hydraulic engineering, ruled this region with exquisite precision. They built aqueducts that still function today. They mapped stars with copper astrolabes. And apparently, they built clocks that boil cold water. At the time of its discovery in the mid-20th century, the artifact was tucked behind a false panel inside a now ruined tower. Local masons attempting restoration heard what they described as a faint breathing, a rhythmic hiss. When they pried the stone loose, they found the device, intact, glistening with condensation, a small plume of vapor rising from its curled nozzle. It was filled with cold water, but the glass was warm to the touch. Scientists assumed a chemical reaction, perhaps a trace of quicklime or mercury inside the base. But tests showed only natural minerals, no combustion materials, no exothermic reactions, just water, and glass, and metal, and motion. Because every hour, like clockwork, the steam pulses stronger, then fades, like a heartbeat, like time. It was moved to a controlled case in a regional museum for preservation, still sealed, still functioning. Temperature-controlled rooms, no heat input. Still, it steams. This is where physics begins to fray. Traditional water clocks, clepsydras, function by letting water flow between containers, using gravity to measure time. Some used siphons or floats to mark hours. But this one has no moving parts, no escape valve, no outlet, just water in equilibrium. That seems to boil without heat. Some researchers propose a kind of resonance effect, that the structure itself, glass, bronze, internal spiral, creates a standing wave, agitating water molecules at just the right frequency. Not enough to raise overall temperature, but enough to excite surface molecules into vapor. But no modern replica has been able to recreate it. Others suggest magnetism, that perhaps an ancient lodestone was embedded beneath the original location, that subtle geomagnetic fields stimulated the water's surface tension. Again, plausible, but never reproduced. Then there's the theory nobody wants to publish in peer-reviewed journals, that the device tracks not just time, but energy fields, natural pulses in the Earth's rotation, barometric pressure, solar cycles. That it doesn't heat the water, it tunes it. And what we see as steam is not boiling at all, but a kind of molecular release triggered by harmonics we don't yet understand. But those are just whispers. What we do know is this: the steam rises stronger at dawn. It peaks at solar noon, regardless of cloud cover, light, or temperature. And at night, it nearly stops. Every day, without fail, as if the clock isn't measuring water, but time itself. There are no records of who built it, no diagrams, no surviving blueprints. Some believe it was a failed experiment. Others say it was never meant for timekeeping, that it was ceremonial, spiritual, a device to show the breath of time exhaled softly into the air. Visitors today still gather around the case in silence, watching, waiting for the next pulse, and when it comes, a faint hiss, a ghost of mist against glass, they feel it. Not just the wonder, but the impossibility. How can water boil with no heat? How can a clock breathe without parts? How can something so old still tick, while everything else around it fades? We may never know the answer, but the steam still rises, and the mystery deepens. In a world obsessed with speed and measurement, one ancient device dares to keep time, softly, silently, and impossibly, boiling in the cold. The clock that was buried alive. In the year 1693, during a storm-lashed winter in the Bavarian town of Kulenheim, a man was dragged through the mud by torchlight, bound, bleeding, and silent. His name was Elias Richter, a humble clockmaker by trade, and a condemned heretic by order of the church. He wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He hadn't murdered, hadn't stolen, hadn't betrayed a crown. His crime, as the court saw it, was far more insidious. He built a clock that did not mark hours, but death. Richter had once been regarded as a prodigy, apprenticing in Vienna before returning to his village and setting up a workshop beneath the church's shadow. He was quiet, meticulous, always tinkering with designs no one else understood. While most craftsmen made timepieces that honored divine order, the 12 hours, the liturgical bells, Elias worked on something else entirely, a timepiece that could, as he claimed, track the moment of a soul's departure. At first, the townspeople simply laughed. Another eccentric mind with gears for brains. But then came the rumors that the clock in Richter's shop would chime hours before a villager's sudden death, that the hands moved of their own accord, that a visiting priest heard it ticking even when it was disassembled on the table. Panic spread like frost. The church was swift. They raided his home, found drawings they called demonic, wheels inscribed with Latin verses, spirals of astrological timing, and a single chilling inscription carved into the clock's casing: "Time bows to no god but truth." He was arrested for heresy. At his trial, Elias refused to speak in his own defense, offering only this: "The clock will outlive us all. Even in the ground, it will remember." He was sentenced to death, not by fire, as was common for heresy, but by burial. They deemed him a contagion of the mind, best sealed away, entombed with his blasphemous creation. His final wish was granted, that his clock be buried with him. They lowered the coffin under heavy stone, and for a time, the earth swallowed Elias Richter and his cursed invention. The decades passed, the memory faded, but the legend did not. In 1792, during a local renovation of the churchyard, a group of gravediggers came upon a sealed coffin surrounded by hard-packed black soil. The wood was nearly fossilized, yet strangely dry. Against orders, one of the men pried it open. What they found chilled them to the bone. Richter's skeletal remains, yes, but beside them, nestled like a relic of the future, was the clock. And it was still ticking, not loudly, not rhythmically. It was slow, deliberate, almost like a breath held between worlds. The hands had not rusted. The gears, those that could be seen, moved with eerie smoothness, untouched by time or decay. Word spread fast. Scientists came, priests came, historians. Some declared it a miracle, others an abomination. The clock was taken to Munich under guard, stored inside a university vault for examination. It never stopped. One report, classified until 1936, describes how the clock seemed to adapt. When left in a sealed room, its ticking slowed as if waiting. When brought near the terminally ill, it began to click more urgently. A nurse reported that it struck 12 at the exact moment of her patient's passing. But when checked later, the hands had moved back. A physicist who studied it for months was driven to madness. In his journal, he wrote, "It doesn't keep time, it questions it. Every tick is an accusation, every movement a memory of something not yet lost." Attempts to disassemble the clock failed. Tools dulled. Screws would not turn. The metal defied X-rays, and modern scanning showed internal components that changed position between scans. In 1954, the Vatican requested custody of the device. The request was denied. Then, in 1981, without warning, the ticking stopped. No one touched it. No one moved it. One day, it simply fell silent. The team monitoring the device noted that the silence coincided, within seconds, with the death of an old man in Kulenheim, a direct descendant of the priest who had sentenced Elias Richter to death. Was it coincidence? Closure? A mechanical act of vengeance across generations? No one knows. Today, the clock remains sealed in a climate-controlled vault under glass, protected more by superstition than science. It hasn't ticked in over 40 years, but maintenance staff claim they sometimes hear something, not quite a tick, not quite a whisper, a kind of pressure, like a heartbeat buried just beneath silence. And if you ask the villagers of Kulenheim, they'll still tell you the clock was buried alive. It was meant to rest with the man who made it, and every second it ticked in the dark was a message that time does not forgive. A message that some inventions are not built to serve us, but to outlast us. A message that even buried truths still count the moments until they rise again. The time bell that refused the king's hour. In a small English town, tucked away in the folds of rolling green hills and fog-thick mornings, there stands a clock tower no one speaks of directly, but everyone knows. Its stones are worn smooth by rain and centuries. Ivy climbs its sides like veins across aging skin. At its peak hangs a bell forged in the late 1300s, simple, dark, massive. And it rings. It rings every day, like every bell in every tower should. But not at the king's hour, 7 minutes early, or 7 minutes late. Always 7 minutes wrong. And no one could fix it, not for lack of trying. When King Edward decreed that all towns and villages in his realm must align their timekeeping to Greenwich Royal Time, messengers were sent out. Orders were nailed to church doors. Time became law. Order, symbol. And those who resisted were punished. Except for this tower. They called it defiant, defective, a relic of poor craftsmanship or stubborn villagers. So the crown sent its finest engineers to examine the mechanism. They measured every gear, adjusted every weight, realigned the pendulum to match the king's master clock down to the second. And for 2 days, it held. Then it slipped, first by seconds, then minutes, until it returned, unshaken, to its old rhythm. 7 minutes off. No more, no less. They replaced the clock. Same result. They removed the bell entirely, thinking the weight or acoustics somehow interfered. Still, the chime returned to its error. It was as if the tower itself remembered, as if time inside those walls bent slightly, refusing to sync with the outside world. Word spread, whispers began, that the tower had a soul, that it marked not hours, but something older. Some said it rang in tune with a forgotten prayer once whispered by the town's dying founders, who, fleeing a plague long ago, buried their own beneath the foundations of the church. That the bell rang for them, for what they lost and what they protected. Others said the bell had been cursed, that it was forged from metal pulled from a downed meteor, and the blacksmith who crafted it wept as he worked, unable to explain why. That when the bell first rang, time itself paused in the fields, birds frozen mid-flight, children mid-laugh, and resumed with a shiver. The king tried again. This time, the punishment was clear. The bell would be removed, the clock dismantled, the townspeople fined. Time was sacred, he said, because time was power, and the bell made a mockery of both. But that night, as the soldiers approached, the town fell silent, not with fear, but something heavier. And when the clock struck midnight, the bell rang once, and only once, loud enough to crack windows, sharp enough to shake birds from trees, deep enough that some said they felt it not in their ears, but in their bones. The next morning, the soldiers left. No record says why, only that they never returned, and the bell remained, 7 minutes off. Generation after generation, clockmakers came and failed. The town stopped inviting them. The people adjusted their lives around the bell. They opened shops when it rang, held weddings and funerals to its rhythm. At first, they called it defiance, but then they called it truth. Because maybe time isn't fixed. Maybe it's not a ruler's right to declare. Maybe there are places where time remembers itself, where it doesn't care who sits on the throne or how many gears tick in the king's clock tower, where it bends ever so slightly to mark something invisible, something deeper than seconds, something you feel but cannot count. Visitors today rarely notice. The tour guides say nothing, but if you stand beneath the tower and wait, you might hear it. That chime, not when you expect it, but 7 minutes before or after, whatever moment you thought it should arrive. And if you listen closely, it doesn't sound like rebellion. It sounds like a reminder that not all things fall in line, that not every system deserves your sync, and that time, like truth, does not always obey the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it listens to something older, quieter, and still rings faithfully. 7 minutes off. The moon dial that tracks forgotten moons. In the cold forests of Eastern Europe, deep in the crumbling basement of a centuries-old chapel, there's a stone disc carved into the wall. It's smooth, faded, and covered in markings no one remembers how to read. Most people walk past it thinking it's decorative, just another ancient symbol in a land full of them. But if you know what to look for, it reveals something stranger. This is no ordinary calendar. It's a moon dial. And not just for our moon. It tracks 3. 1 you know, 2 you've forgotten. This is the moon dial that tracks forgotten moons, a relic of a time when the sky was more crowded, or perhaps when human memory still held things it's since erased. The dial was first documented in 1883 during an architectural survey of abandoned religious sites across the Carpathians. Scholars noticed the central wheel, a familiar 29-day lunar cycle, but what caught their attention were the 2 outer rings. Each one tracked time differently, one at 37 days, the other at 62. No known lunar body matches those cycles. And yet, the device aligns, not with modern astronomy, but with recorded anomalies, folklore, reports stretching back to Babylonian tablets, stories of ghost moons, night shadows, and second moons that rise in years of plague or transformation, dismissed by science, preserved in myth, and maybe etched into this stone. The central wheel moves slowly, aligning with our moon's orbit. It marks full moons, eclipses, and even blue moons with a kind of lunar poetry. But the outer rings? They rotate based on something else, something no one can see, yet the dial moves with them, precisely, as if syncing to a rhythm we no longer hear. Some researchers believe the dial is symbolic, an artifact of religious astronomy marking sacred intervals. Others aren't so sure, because once every few years, all three rings align, and when they do, strange things are reported near the site. Unusual tides in distant rivers, sudden nocturnal wildlife migrations, and once a pale orb sighted in the sky just above the horizon that disappeared within minutes. Photographs were attempted, none developed. Only one thing appears in every account: a feeling that something very old is awake. Theories multiply. Some say these forgotten moons were once real, celestial companions to Earth that were destroyed, pulled into collision, or rendered invisible by cosmic shifts. Others claim the dial measures more spiritual or dimensional cycles, shadows of moons, not moons themselves, cycles of influence, not light. Psychologists who study the region's folklore have noted a disturbing pattern. In villages near the dial, episodes of mass sleepwalking, shared dreams, and lunar phobias seem to spike in years when the outer moons complete a turn. And the people? They don't talk about the dial, not directly. They refer to it in whispers. The cold face, the mother's mirror, the one that watches when the other turns away. You ask too many questions, they stop answering. Because to them, the moon is not singular. It never was. Let me give you a story. In 1937, a group of scholars attempted to remove the dial from the wall for study. They brought chisels, cranes, equipment, but the stone resisted, as if fused with the building's bones. That night, all 6 researchers reportedly had identical dreams of a vast silver eye spinning above a black sea, reflecting 3 moons, one bright, one pale, one cracked. They abandoned the project the next morning. The dial has remained untouched ever since. It still moves, no motors, no human contact, just slow, silent motion. And every time the outer moons complete their orbit, someone comes to watch. No one ever speaks. They just stand in front of it, waiting. For what, no one knows. Or maybe they do. And they've just learned not to say. So the next time you look up at the full moon glowing alone in the sky, remember this. There was a time when we believed it wasn't alone, and there may still be machines, forgotten, silent, hidden, tracking the others, waiting for them to return. The clock room that ages you. There's a room in the heart of the Czech Republic, unmarked on public maps, locked behind iron doors in a forgotten wing of a once-abandoned monastery. Locals call it Starý čas, old time. And what's inside that room is not just old, it's wrong. At the center of the chamber stands an astronomical clock, tall, towering, blackened with age. Its brass face is tarnished and green with corrosion, yet the constellations etched across its surface still gleam, faintly, as if lit from within. The mechanism is exposed. Wheels turn behind glass so thick it distorts your reflection. The gears are massive, carved not just to measure hours, but to track the movements of stars, planetary orbits, and time cycles long forgotten by modern calendars. It doesn't tick like a normal clock. It hums. A low vibration you don't hear so much as feel. A sensation in your teeth, behind your eyes, beneath your ribs. as if the air inside the room is folding quietly around you, rearranging itself. At first glance, it seems like just another ancient relic, but visitors who've entered the room, especially those who've stayed longer than a few minutes, report something strange: aches in their joints, vision blurring, hair that seems thinner than before, fingernails that look brittle. Some even claim their voices drop half an octave. Others describe faint liver spots where there were none. And one man, an engineer from Prague, saw the photos taken of him before entering the room and said with absolute certainty, "That's not what I look like anymore." He was 43. After spending 12 minutes in the room, biometric scanners at the university registered his body age at 56. It wasn't just fatigue. It wasn't in his head. And it wasn't the only case. Of the 37 known visitors to the clock room over the past 3 decades, 26 reported similar symptoms: joint pain, premature graying, sudden dental decay, accelerated skin aging, sometimes within hours of leaving. Medical science has no answer: no radiation, no chemical exposure, no pathogens. But something is happening, and it always points back to that room, that clock. Some believe it's a spatial anomaly, that the chamber is a kind of bubble where time doesn't flow evenly. One physicist who visited called it a temporal sinkhole. She claimed the clock wasn't measuring time, it was consuming it, draining it from the living bodies that entered its radius. She left after 4 minutes, and later told colleagues she couldn't sleep for weeks because she kept dreaming of her own bones, counting themselves. Others have stranger theories. They point to the origin of the monastery, built in the 1300s by a sect obsessed with astronomical alignment and death rituals. The monks who lived there had a symbol, an eye split by a spiral. Their scrolls mention the cost of observation and the sacrifice required to see the machine clearly. Some believe the clock was their creation, not to measure time, but to trap it, to anchor something in place, a celestial alignment, a cycle, a pattern that, if broken, would cause reality to slip. But a machine like that doesn't run on electricity. It runs on something else: attention, presence, life. You stand near it, you feed it, and in return, it lets the world keep spinning. But you spin faster. The effect doesn't hit everyone the same way. Some feel nothing. Others deteriorate in days. A few have had reversals, temporary clarity, memories from their childhood returning vividly, dreams that feel like forgotten futures. As if the clock doesn't just pull you forward, it shows you the timeline. Not the one you're on, the one you avoided, the one you might have lived. It's almost as if, in that room, time isn't linear. It's reflective. You step into the chamber, and the machine doesn't just age you, it measures you. It shows you to yourself, as you really are, underneath the edits and illusions. And aging? That's just the side effect of truth. That's why no photographs are allowed anymore. Why researchers now wear biometric suits. Why the door remains sealed, except on very specific nights. Because the last visitor, the last unauthorized one, went in alone. For only 6 minutes. Security found him in the hallway outside. Collapsed. Hair white. Skin translucent. Fingertips curled like autumn leaves. He couldn't speak, only mouthed one word, over and over: rewinding. He died that night, and when they checked the clock the next morning, something had changed. A new hand had appeared, thin, sharp, red like blood beneath glass. It wasn't there before, and no one knows what it's counting toward, or what happens when it completes its cycle. So now the room is silent again. The clock turns, the air hums, and somewhere, beneath the monastery floor, time feeds patiently on those who come too close. So, if you ever find yourself wandering through the hills of Bohemia, and you stumble across an old stone structure covered in ivy, and someone warns you of a room where time runs strange, listen and walk away, because whatever's turning inside that clock, it's not meant to stop, and it doesn't care if it has to take you to keep going. They let it run, and the legend grew. Some say it's counting down to something, not a date, a moment, a convergence, a fracture, something that doesn't exist on the calendar but in the undercurrent of time itself. Others believe it's not counting down at all, but counting back, marking history in reverse, not recording the future, but unraveling the past. There are stories of those who stared too long into the clock's motion, who lost track of where they were or when. One woman claimed she remembered being a child again, vividly, smelling her mother's perfume, hearing the exact pitch of a forgotten lullaby. Another man, a historian, said he saw things that never happened, memories of a life that wasn't his, a house in a city that never existed, names that felt familiar but weren't. Both suffered intense disorientation for days, their sense of time broken, like the clock had shown them not what time is, but what time hides. Because time, as we know it, only moves forward. That's what we've been told. That's the rule we've accepted. But the reversal clock suggests otherwise. It whispers that time is not a line, but a spiral, that it's not progress, but recursion, that the reason it feels like we're always circling the same crises, the same patterns, the same emotions, is because we are. Because time doesn't carry us into the future. It loops us through fragments of forgotten pasts, dressed in new language, masked in modernity, but always repeating. And maybe the clock knows. Maybe it doesn't measure hours or minutes or days. Maybe it measures returns. Maybe each full backward sweep marks another cycle completed, another repetition clicked into place. There's a detail most people miss. Just before midnight, every night, the clock's hands don't land perfectly at 12. They stop just shy, hover, then jerk slightly. A pause, a hesitation. Some say that's when it thinks, when it recalibrates its descent, when it remembers what it's actually counting. There's also the number carved into its base, invisible unless you're standing directly beneath it, looking up at just the right angle. It's not a date, it's a sequence, engraved in Old Polish, roughly translated to, "When the past reaches the beginning again, the wound will reopen." No one knows what it means, but every decade or so, someone tries to shut the clock down, unplug it, break the mechanism, and every time, within 24 hours, it resumes. One time, they even removed the entire face. It still kept ticking, an invisible rhythm echoing through the cathedral walls, vibrating just beneath the floorboards. Some believe the clock is the anchor of something buried below, a mechanism older than the church, older than the town, older than timekeeping itself. That the backward movement isn't malfunction, it's preservation. That the world ended once already, and the clock is helping us forget, one tick at a time, until the cycle loops back to the beginning. And then, what? Will it stop? Will it reset? Or will it count backward faster? No one knows, because no one built it. At least no records show who did. No blueprint, no signature, no origin, just a clock, older than memory, counting down or up or around. So if you're ever in Krakow and you pass through the cathedral at dusk, look up, watch the hands move in reverse, feel the tug in your stomach, the chill beneath your ribs. Ask yourself, what exactly is it counting toward? And do you really want to know what happens when it gets there? The clock. With a missing center. High atop the windswept cliffs of northern Scotland stands a ruin that few speak of and even fewer dare to enter. It has no official name on modern maps. Only the locals still call it what the stones once whispered, Carn Feagle, the Forbidden Keep. For centuries, the castle was just another crumbling fortress among many, broken battlements, lichen-covered towers, half swallowed by heather and time. But in 1912, during a remote archaeological survey, a team from the University of Edinburgh stumbled upon something no textbook had ever prepared them for. In the collapsed west wing, Behind a fallen wall of ironwood beams and limestone slabs, they found a sealed chamber, and within it, a clock, or rather, something like one. Nearly 2 meters across, it was embedded into the stone wall, circular, metallic, and unmarked by any script or number. A flat dial of polished bronze, silent, cold, except for the movement, because it moved, smoothly, precisely, unceasingly. The outer ring of the dial rotated clockwise, completing a full cycle every 61 minutes. Inside it, a second smaller ring turned counterclockwise, completing its revolution every 13 hours. But in the center, where the axle, the driving force, the mechanical heart should be, there was nothing. No pivot, no gears, just a gaping absence, a hollow void, dark and flat like glass, yet refusing all reflection. Even when light was shone directly onto it, the center remained still, and yet the rings moved perfectly. The discovery was met first with fascination, then unease. Experts brought in to examine the mechanism were baffled. There were no external power sources, no motors, no visible winding system, and when they tried to move it manually, it resisted. Not with force, but with silence, as if it operated on a logic outside of friction or mass. The lead engineer, Dr. Ian Calder, wrote in his report, "We have a turning mechanism that turns without torque, a dial that rotates with no center to bind it. The motion appears internal, but there is no inside." Worse still, their instruments refused to behave. Magnetic compasses spun erratically, watches slowed. Timepieces that had been precise to the second fell out of sync when placed near the device. One assistant noted her heartbeat felt off while standing beside it, like her body was adjusting to something slower than time. In folklore texts from the region, vague references exist to the hollow circle that counts not hours but returns. A 14th century Gaelic manuscript found in a nearby chapel spoke of a clock of exile, built not to measure time, but to remember it. An echo locked in motion, marking the spiral of something lost. The same text refers to a ritual performed each equinox, the turning of the empty wheel, believed to keep the seasons from collapsing into one. Could this be what they found? In 1920, a team attempted to remove the device from the wall. The moment the outer casing was pried even a centimeter, the movement stopped, and the room plunged into absolute silence. No wind, no breath. One of the team members claimed she couldn't hear her own thoughts. When the piece was resealed, the motion resumed, as if nothing had happened. Theories multiplied. Some claimed it was an ancient astrolabe or forgotten Celtic orrery. Others believed it to be a navigational device, its rotation mapping not time, but position within some larger pattern, perhaps the solar plane, perhaps a calendar lost to history, perhaps something far older. And then came the most disturbing hypothesis. The missing center, some argued, wasn't missing at all. It was present, but not in this dimension. A localized anomaly, a knot in space, where physical matter simply fails to register. The device didn't need an axle because its axis was elsewhere, rooted in something no longer aligned with the physical world. They called it the dial of absence, and over time, people stopped studying it. Too many strange effects, too many dreams reported by those who spent nights near the ruin, visions of an endless spiral, a corridor of turning rings, voices speaking in reversed whispers. One man went blind for 12 hours after staring into the center. Another vanished entirely, last seen walking toward the castle during a thunderstorm, humming in a strange, syncopated rhythm no one could identify. In 1971, the ruins were quietly sealed by a private trust. The site was fenced off, the road leading to it overgrown. The public reason? Structural instability. But the locals tell a different story. They say the clock still turns, that some nights, if the wind dies and the sea holds its breath, you can hear it, a slow, grinding sound from deep within the stones, a rhythm that doesn't match the seconds, or the minutes, or anything you can measure. Some believe it's counting down, others that it's counting back. But perhaps the most haunting theory is the simplest, that it's not keeping time at all. It's correcting it, one slow, invisible second at a time. The bell tower that sings Gregorian time. In a small town in northern Italy, cradled between fog-covered vineyards and ancient stone walls, there stands a bell tower unlike any other. It does not ring. It does not chime. It sings. On the hour, every hour, voices rise from within its ancient stone, layered, slow, and haunting. It is not music in the traditional sense. It is chant, wordless, harmonic, echoing Gregorian tones that seem to float through the air like mist. But there is no choir, no singers, no monks hidden in robes behind cathedral doors. Only a tower, and the voice that lives inside it. They call it the bell tower that sings Gregorian time. And no one knows how it works. The tower is older than the town's written history. Carved inscriptions on its inner walls predate any known alphabet. Its foundation is built not of brick, but massive slabs of volcanic rock, weathered smooth. The villagers say it was not built, but found, that the town rose around it like a nest around a relic. No modern mechanism explains the sound. The tower has no speakers, no wires, no electricity. It does not vibrate like a traditional bell tower. There are no moving hammers, no suspended metal, no discernible clockwork system. And yet, on the hour it begins. A single note, deep and resonant, swells into a chord. Then other tones layer above it, perfectly harmonic, male voices, ageless. Each chant lasts exactly 60 seconds. And then, silence. Not even an echo, just the air, emptied. No one knows where the sound originates. Engineers have brought equipment, microphones, spectrum analyzers, ultrasonic probes. All have failed. The sound doesn't come from anywhere. It simply appears, as if reality itself hums for a moment, then forgets. Some say the tower is an instrument, not one played, but one alive. That it responds to time, not mechanically, but spiritually. That each chant is not a sound, but a breath, a heartbeat, a soul remembering its place in the hourglass of the day. Others whisper it's a residual echo, left behind by monks who once lived in a hidden monastery, now buried beneath the stones. That their rituals etch themselves into the walls like sacred fingerprints. That the chants we hear are not performed, but replayed by time itself. One theory suggests the voices aren't human, that they are mathematical tones encoded in frequencies older than written music. That Gregorian chant was not invented, but discovered, pulled from the same harmonic blueprint the tower sings now, a physics of devotion, an architecture of sound. Tourists visit, but recordings never capture it fully. The sound distorts, becomes static. The microphones pick up only fragments, empty vibrations with no tonal source. But in person, it's different. The chants pass through you. You don't just hear them, you feel them. In your ribs, in your jaw, in your thoughts. Some say the chants change you. That if you stand beneath the tower long enough, it shifts your perception of time. Minutes feel stretched. Hours lose their urgency. You leave feeling unanchored, like something important passed through you while you weren't quite awake. Local villagers avoid standing beneath it at noon or midnight. They say those hours carry something extra, something closer to truth or madness. Once, a scholar insisted on staying for every chant of the day. He sat on a bench beneath the tower, eyes closed, hands on his knees. He left before dawn the next day, and never wrote a single word of his findings. Only this, scribbled on a napkin at a nearby cafe. The tower does not sing to time, it sings within it, and time listens. The church won't speak of the tower. It isn't listed on official maps. But if you ask the right person, they'll point you to it. A narrow stone street, a forgotten courtyard, and a shadow that stretches across the hour. You'll hear the chant before you see it. And when you do, when the voices begin, you'll forget your watch, your phone, even the name of the hour, because time, in that moment, does not tick. It resonates. It becomes something sacred, measured not in seconds, but in sound. Not by what you count, but by what you feel. The timepiece that tracks the end of days. In the belfry of a crumbling stone church beneath faded frescoes and rusted iron bells, there is a clock unlike any other. The hours are marked in Latin. The face is carved from blackened wood, its numbers distorted, almost Gothic. It has 3 hands you'd expect, one for hours, one for minutes, one for liturgical cycles. But then there's a fourth, a slender, rust-colored arm stretching across the dial. It's labeled with a single word, finis, the end. This is the timepiece that tracks the end of days. And it moved only once. The clock was built in the 1300s in a small town nestled in the hills of Central Europe. Commissioned by monks, constructed by artisans, it was meant to be a sacred machine, a way to align the rhythms of the church with the rhythms of heaven. And for a while, that's all it was, until August 1348. That's when the fourth hand moved. No one touched it. No one adjusted the mechanism. But on that morning, the Fini hand, which had remained frozen for decades, rotated precisely 270 degrees and stopped over an unmarked notch at the base of the clock face. That night, a traveler arrived, coughing, fevered, bleeding. Within a week, half the town was dead. The Black Death had come. And the monks began to whisper. The clock had known. At first, people dismissed it as coincidence, a trick of the eye, a jammed gear suddenly loosening. But the town's records, preserved in a dusty cathedral archive, show that the clock had been examined regularly. The hand had never moved, until the plague, until the end. After the pandemic passed, no one dared remove the Fini hand. They believed it had marked something eternal, not just the end of people, but the end of certainty, the illusion that time was predictable, that clocks only told the time. This one predicted the fall. Over the centuries, the church decayed. The bells stopped ringing. The town faded into obscurity. But the clock remained, sometimes frozen, sometimes ticking faintly, and always with that fourth hand pointing to the notch where death once entered. Scholars have studied it. Clockmakers have disassembled and reassembled the gears. There's no known mechanism attached to the fourth hand. It's independent, decorative, some say, symbolic. And yet, no other part of the machine shows signs of symbolic design. It was built with purpose, with precision. Every component serves a function, so why include a hand that does nothing? Unless it wasn't meant to move often, unless it was meant to move once, and maybe again. Let me tell you a story. In 1914, during the early days of World War I, rumors spread that the hand had trembled, just slightly, on the morning Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. No rotation, no shift, but witnesses said it quivered, and a week later, the world was at war. The tremor was never recorded mechanically, but those who saw it never forgot. They called it the warning. Today, the church is locked. The clock is behind glass. But the fourth hand is still there, still fixed in place, still labeled with that final, silent word. Finis. No one knows what would happen if it moved again, whether it marks only global disasters or deeply personal ones, whether it responds to fate or reflects it. Some believe the hand is connected to astronomical cycles lost to modern timekeeping. Others say it's part of an abandoned medieval theory, that time is not linear but narrative, that certain moments in history are endings and others are beginnings, and that a true clock would track both. But maybe it's simpler. Maybe the monks who built it had seen something, felt something, and in a moment of clarity gave their clock a fourth purpose, to remind all who looked upon it that time does not only lead forward, it ends, Suddenly, completely, without warning. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you can hear it, not ticking like a normal clock, but waiting. So the next time you pass a quiet church long forgotten by the world, ask yourself, what if there's a hand no one talks about? And what if it moves again? Would we notice? Would we believe? Or would we realize too late that the end doesn't always come with trumpets? Sometimes it arrives with a single silent turn. The clock that counts backward. In the heart of Krakow, nestled within the Gothic bones of a weather-worn cathedral, there's a clock. Tourists pass beneath it every day. Most don't even notice. It hangs high above a narrow archway, its face blackened with soot, its numerals faded, its surface cracked like something trying to remember itself. It ticks, quietly, but not like other clocks, because this one moves in reverse. Its hands sweep counterclockwise. It counts backward, always has, always will. It's called Zegar Vstechny, the reversal clock, and no one knows why it runs that way, not even the priests who've lived beneath its shadow for generations, not the historians who've studied its ancient gears, not the engineers who've tried, again and again, to fix it. They've taken it apart, they've reset it, rewired it, recast individual gears, and every single time, the moment they restart it, it resumes its backward rhythm, unaffected, unbothered, unstoppable. It simply begins rewinding time once more, as if that direction is embedded into its purpose, or its warning. The first known record of the clock appears in a monastery journal from 1386. A monk wrote that it had no right to be right, and yet it is. He called it a mirror of time's intention. He said it ticks towards something we can't yet remember. Since then, it's been running without pause. It survived wars, fires, earthquakes, regime changes, renovations. In every new era, someone tries to correct it and fails. So eventually, people stopped trying. The sundial that glows at midnight. High in the Pyrenees, buried in the cold stone walls of a crumbling Benedictine monastery, there is a relic that has never stopped working. It's embedded in black stone, obsidian-like, polished smooth. A sundial, a relic of timekeeping as old as civilization itself. But this one doesn't face the sun. It doesn't glint at noon. It doesn't track shadow. It glows at midnight, faintly, coldly, consistently. This is the sundial that glows at midnight, an impossible artifact that defies the very function it was built for. Sundials need light. They mark time by casting shadows. Without sunlight, they're nothing but carved stone. And yet, in the dead of night, when no moon hangs overhead, when clouds seal off the stars, this dial emits a pale green-blue light, just enough to reveal its etched lines, just enough to read the hour, and somehow, its glowing tip still tracks time, moving in perfect rhythm, even when the sky is black, even when no source of light exists for miles. It was discovered in the 19th century by French cartographers mapping the ruins. They camped in the courtyard and reported seeing a ghost flame coming from the monastery wall. At first, they assumed it was phosphorescent moss or bioluminescent fungus. But when they climbed closer, they found the stone warm to the touch, not hot, not radiating heat, just alive. They noted the time, 12:03 a.m. The glowing needle, or gnomon, aligned exactly with the third-minute marker past midnight. They waited, watched, and slowly it shifted, at 1 minute per minute, exactly as it should, but it was glowing, in total darkness. When the monastery was fully excavated, they found the dial still intact, fused into volcanic stonework. The rest of the monastery had fallen into decay, but the wall containing the dial stood untouched. No debris, no overgrowth, just a panel of black rock, framed like an altar. Tests were conducted. No radium, no phosphorus, no known luminescent compound. The stone was inert by every modern measurement, and yet it glowed. Every night, and only at night. It does not glow during the day, even in shadow. It doesn't respond to UV light, heat, or infrared stimulation. Only when the world is fully asleep does it come alive. Some believed it was divine, a miracle, a message from monks long gone, who once charted the skies in secret, believing time could be woven into stone. Others searched for a scientific explanation. They theorized piezoelectric effects, pressure in the stone releasing faint electrical charges from centuries of tectonic vibration. But that doesn't explain the precision. It doesn't explain how the dial knows where the hour is, without light, without magnetism, without any detectable input. It shouldn't work, but it does. And the light isn't just ambient. It moves, not smoothly, but with a kind of pulse. Every 60 seconds, the glow subtly shifts, like the breath of a sleeping giant, like the ticking of a clock no one can hear. A team of physicists set up time-lapse photography. Over 12 hours, the gnomon glowed a full circle. The hours passed in silence, but each one marked. They compared it to atomic time. It was accurate to within a single second. That's more precise than many mechanical watches. From a sundial, in the dark, with no sun. It's been sealed in a climate-controlled chamber now, behind glass. Visitors gather at nightfall, waiting for the light to rise from within the stone. And when it does, it's silent, haunting, beautiful. There are no wires, no batteries, no measurable current, just rock and rhythm. Some researchers now believe the dial was designed not to track time, but to reflect it, mirroring some deeper cosmic pulse, some undercurrent we don't yet understand. They've begun comparing its movement to gravitational cycles, solar flares, even deep space radiation. Nothing lines up, and yet the dial keeps turning. Some say it proves time isn't linear, that maybe time isn't something we measure, but something that moves through us. And the dial? Just a stone tuned to receive it, like an antenna, like a fossilized metronome, a frozen prayer still keeping pace with the stars. Whatever it is, it continues. No one can stop it, no one can replicate it. And every year, on winter solstice, when the sun stands still and darkness rules the sky, the glow intensifies. For one night only, it shines bright enough to light the wall around it. The hour markers blaze with blue fire. Then, by dawn, it fades again. The monastery is silent, but the sundial still ticks, still glows, still keeps time, when no time should be visible, and no light should exist.